The movie opens with the horrifying discovery of a naked body covered in deep cuts and surgical wounds. Soon after, the story moves to a snowy mountain forest, where we are introduced to Inspector Pierre. He arrives after receiving a report about a dead university librarian named Remy Coyce, a 32-year-old man who had been missing for 2 days. Remy was known as a hardworking and disciplined employee who never caused trouble. His body was discovered hanging from a mountain cliff nearly 50 meters above the ground by a climber passing through the area. The investigation then takes us to Guernsey, one of the oldest and most prestigious universities in Europe, where Remy worked. The university is so massive and powerful that it operates almost like its own city. Guernsey has its own power plant, its own hospital, more than 1,000 students and over 100 professors. The dean practically controls the entire valley because the university provides free electricity and healthcare for the local residents. Pierre and the police arrive at the morgue to examine Remy's body, and the condition is absolutely brutal. According to the doctor, the wounds were made using an extremely sharp blade, normally used for cutting carpets. The hospital contacts an eye specialist to help analyze the case. The autopsy reveals that Remy suffered for nearly 5 hours before finally dying, meaning he was tortured and dissected while fully conscious. Before the specialist officially joins the investigation, Pierre decides to visit him personally. The doctor's name is Bernard, a respected eye surgeon who once taught at Guernsey until 1982. He left the university after a serious disagreement with the dean. Bernard already knows about Remy's death and was also familiar with Remy's father. When Pierre shows him the crime scene photos, Bernard is visibly shocked by what he sees. Pierre explains that Remy's eyeballs were completely removed, and he wants Bernard's opinion as an eye specialist about mutilation cases like this. Bernard cannot fully understand the motive just from the photos alone, but he mentions something interesting. For years, he had been studying hereditary eye diseases that affected generations of powerful professors and elite families connected to the university. According to Bernard, the killer's actions may be connected to those inherited illnesses. The removal of the eyes and hands could be more than simple torture. It might actually be a message or a clue meant for the police. Meanwhile, somewhere else, another detective named Max gets pulled into a completely different case. 2 officers ask him to investigate an act of vandalism involving a grave. Someone had painted swastikas near the tomb of a young girl named Judith, who supposedly died back in 1982. Meanwhile, at a nearby school, someone breaks into the archive room. But according to the headmistress, nothing was actually stolen. Since there is no missing property, Max decides to close the case and leave. But on his way out, something about Judith suddenly catches his attention. He goes back and starts asking questions about her. When they check the records again, they discover something disturbing. The files about Judith, the girl who supposedly died in a horrific accident years ago, are now missing. Even all of her photographs have disappeared. Max immediately heads to the Highway Patrol office to investigate the fatal accident that happened back in 1982. After searching through the records for the crash near kilometer 30, the officers managed to find Judith's name, and luckily the original physical files are still stored away. As Max reviews the case, he is shocked by how brutal the accident really was. Judith's body had been completely destroyed after being hit by a speeding truck traveling over 120 miles per hour. Her mother had been at the scene, crying while holding one of Judith's severed fingers. According to the report, Judith had suddenly walked onto the highway for no reason, but Judith's mother believed something far stranger. She became convinced that her daughter had been targeted by evil forces and that demons were somehow responsible for her death. Back at Guernsey University, Pierre prepares to meet the dean. As Pierre continues connecting the murders to the university itself, the dean becomes visibly offended. To him, Guernsey is a sacred institution, a temple of knowledge, and he refuses to believe it could be tied to something so horrifying. After gathering enough information, Pierre asks Hubert to take him to Remy's apartment. During the drive, Hubert reveals more details about Remy's daily life. Apparently, Remy did much more than organize books. He also maintained the seating arrangements inside the library. At Guernsey, every seat in the library is considered personal property and belongs to someone specific. Inside Remy's apartment, Pierre notices several strange photographs, including Olympic athletes and even pictures of unborn babies. These images are hidden inside Remy's thesis, which carries the unsettling title, "We are the masters, we are the slaves, we are everywhere. We control the red rivers." A dark mystery is beginning to surface. This is the Crimson Rivers. Not long after that, Pierre meets Fanny, the geology student who discovered Remy's body. Unlike many of the privileged students at Guernsey, who rely on family influence and connections, Fanny seems completely different. Even though her own father is a professor at the university, she wants nothing to do with that elite system. Not long after, Pierre receives a call from the pathology team. They have discovered something strange on Remy's body. Traces of acid rain were found inside his eye sockets. The discovery makes no sense because acid rain had not occurred in the region since the 1970s. At the same time, Max heads to a church to meet Sister Andre, Judith's mother. After her daughter's death, Andre became a nun and locked herself away from the outside world. She refuses to leave the church, hoping a life of isolation will help her forget the tragedy that destroyed her family. Max informs her that someone recently tried to steal Judith's body from the grave. But instead of being shocked, Andre reacts as if she had been expecting it all along. She becomes convinced that the people who once hunted Judith have returned to finish what they started. In her mind, Judith's face itself was dangerous to them. As Max continues questioning her, more disturbing details begin to surface. Years ago, Andre and Judith had once lived in Guernsey. Andre also suffers from blindness in one of her eyes, which immediately connects her to the strange hereditary illnesses Bernard mentioned earlier. According to Andre, she and Judith spent years trying to escape while constantly being pursued. Meanwhile, Pierre and Fanny travel into the icy mountains, searching for the source of the acid water connected to Remy's murder. Fanny eventually finds water that perfectly matches the traces discovered on the victim's body. Curious about where it came from, Pierre continues exploring deeper into the frozen area. That is when they stumble upon a hidden cave buried within the ice, and inside it, they discover another corpse frozen behind the glacier. Back on Max's side of the investigation, he tracks down a local gang to ask about the swastika painted on Judith's grave, but instead of cooperating, the gang members try to intimidate him and start a fight. Unfortunately for them, Max is more than capable of handling himself. Once the gang realizes they are losing badly, one of them finally talks. He admits they had nothing to do with the grave robbery or the vandalism. However, he did notice someone suspicious driving a white Lada near the cemetery late at night. Max immediately orders his team to track down every white Lada registered in the city. Meanwhile, Pierre and Fanny return with the frozen corpse they discovered in the mountains, and the police soon manage to identify the body. At the same time, Max receives new information while stopping at a gas station. There are 132 white Ladas registered in the area, so he narrows the search by focusing only on owners connected to Guernsey University. Eventually, one name stands out, a man named Philip, and when the story cuts back to Pierre, the shocking truth is finally revealed. The frozen corpse discovered inside the glacier was Philip himself. Philip was a former Guernsey student who earned his doctorate at just 25 years old. He later worked in the maternity ward at Guernsey Hospital. Pierre quickly asks the police for Philip's apartment address. But by the time he arrives, Max is already there trying to break inside. The moment Pierre sees him forcing the door open, he immediately tackles him, thinking he might be the suspect. Things almost turn violent between them, but the situation calms down once Max shows his badge and explains that he is also investigating the case.
Relève-toi, doucement.
Hey! Ok. Ok. Alors rends-moi mon flingue,
Bouge pas!
Douce, dans l'état d'arrestation, je suis un keuf!
After introducing themselves properly, the two detectives finally decide to work together and search the apartment. As they investigate the place separately, Max looks through Philip's thesis papers and secretly discovers an old photograph that immediately catches his attention. Meanwhile, Pierre enters another room and finds something far more disturbing. The room is filled with dogs, but hidden behind it is a laboratory used for genetic experiments. The entire place appears to be designed for testing on animals and modifying them into stronger, more aggressive fighting dogs. Pierre barely reacts to the horrifying discovery. Instead, he quietly leaves, and Max follows him. Pierre then takes Max directly to the morgue and reveals the identity of the frozen body they found in the mountain. According to the forensic team, Philip was murdered using the same method as Remy. He had been strangled to death. However, unlike Remy, Philip was not tortured beforehand. His hands were amputated only after he was already dead. Then the forensic doctor discovers something even stranger. Philip's eyes are not real. They are glass prosthetic eyes that originally came from Dr. Bernard's clinic. The moment Pierre hears this, he immediately orders the police to head to Bernard's house. Pierre and Max rush there ahead of everyone else. But once they enter the house, they are met with another horrifying scene. Dr. Bernard has already been murdered. His body is hanging lifelessly, his hands missing, while blood pours from his damaged eyes. And even worse, the killer is still inside the house. Without warning, the attacker suddenly ambushes Pierre. A brutal struggle breaks out, but instead of killing him, the mysterious figure escapes before Max can catch up. Despite Max's strength, the killer manages to overpower him physically and disappear into the darkness. Soon afterward, the rest of the police arrive at the scene and begin investigating the area. Max demands answers from Pierre, but Pierre himself still cannot fully understand what kind of case they are dealing with. The police then examine fingerprints found on Pierre's gun, which the killer briefly grabbed during the fight. None of the prints match anyone in the system, but things take a shocking turn once Max reveals the photograph he secretly took from Philip's thesis. The photo turns out to be a picture of Judith, and when the fingerprints on the photo are analyzed, they perfectly match the same fingerprints found on Pierre's gun. Realizing how serious this connection is, Pierre pulls Max aside for a private conversation. Max finally explains everything from the beginning. The entire investigation started when Philip was caught breaking into Judith's grave and leaving swastika symbols behind. Shortly afterwards, someone also broke into the school archives and stole Judith's records, along with all her photographs. The photo Max found is supposedly a picture of Judith herself, but there is one major problem. Nobody actually knows which person in the photograph is Judith because her face had been completely destroyed in the highway accident years earlier. And according to Judith's mother, Andre, the truth behind her daughter's death was far darker than a simple accident. She remained convinced that Judith had been hunted and killed by something evil. At this point, Pierre finally starts forming a terrifying theory. He believes that Remy, Philip, and Bernard were all connected to something that happened 20 years ago involving Judith. Whoever the killer is, this may all be part of a revenge plan, and every victim so far has deep ties to Guernsey University. To uncover the truth, Pierre asks Max to focus on one important question. Was Judith really dead? The two investigators split up and continue working separately. Pierre returns to the police station and meets Fanny after she finishes being questioned by officers. He later offers to drive her home, and once they arrive, Fanny invites him inside. Meanwhile, Max heads straight to Judith's grave. Determined to settle the mystery once and for all, he digs up the coffin himself. But when he opens it, he makes a shocking discovery. The coffin is completely empty. Back at Fanny's home, Pierre notices how simple and isolated her life really is. She does not even own a television or a radio. But while looking around the house, Pierre discovers something unusual. Hidden among her belongings is a special grenade designed to trigger avalanches in the mountains. Not long after, Pierre returns to Guernsey University and visits the library once again. There he speaks with a police officer who has been studying Remy's thesis. The contents of the thesis are deeply disturbing. It explains theories about creating the perfect human being by selectively breeding strong and intelligent people together. The process involves carefully choosing children with desirable traits and forcing them into arranged reproduction programs. The officer explains that this ideology is known as eugenics, the same twisted concept once practiced by Nazi supporters. The moment Pierre hears this, everything starts connecting in his mind. He immediately storms toward the library platform where Remy once worked. Soon after, the dean arrives and demands that Pierre leave the university alone. But Pierre has had enough. He openly accuses Philip, Remy, and Bernard of sharing a dark secret tied directly to the murders. And then he drops an even more shocking theory. Maybe those three men were never victims at all. Maybe they were actually part of something terrible. The dean becomes furious at the accusation, especially when Pierre suggests that Guernsey itself may be connected to the killings. The argument quickly spirals out of control. Overcome with anger, Pierre grabs the dean by the throat and nearly kills him right there, convinced that the university has been hiding horrifying crimes for decades. Luckily, Max arrives just in time and pulls Pierre away before things go too far.
Je n'ai pas fait le travail moi-même. Je me trompe. C'est que je prouvais que tout vient de vous. Premier sur la liste. Je n'ai pas fait le travail moi-même. Je me trompe.
Ça va pas ou quoi? Il est mort. Lâchez-le.
Max then reveals what he discovered at Judith's grave. He hands Pierre a photograph he found there. Without wasting another second, Pierre drags Max away and finally explains the truth he has begun piecing together. The photograph is actually a picture of Fanny. the same Fanny who has been helping them investigate this entire time. Pierre realizes that Gurnon's professors had been practicing incest for generations in an attempt to preserve elite bloodlines. But over time, those inbred families began developing hereditary illnesses and intellectual decline, exactly as Dr. Bernard had warned earlier in the investigation. The university's leaders desperately needed healthy blood to continue their twisted experiments. Once the professors realized their bloodlines were becoming weaker, they desperately needed new genetics to continue their experiments. So they secretly began swapping their own children with healthy newborn babies from the mountains. Philip's father was one of the people responsible for carrying out the exchanges inside the maternity ward. He swapped Fanny with Judith at birth, and they did the same thing to many other children as well. The goal was terrifying. Gurnon was not just a university anymore. It had become a hidden breeding program designed to create what they believed was the perfect human race, all through illegal experiments and generations of manipulation. Just as Pierre and Max finally uncover the truth, Hubert suddenly attacks them. He is willing to do anything to stop them from exposing the university's secrets.
Hey, fais gaffe! C'est qui, ce fils de pute?
After dealing with Hubert, Pierre and Max rush to Fanny's house. But by the time they arrive, she is already gone. As they search through the basement, they discover horrifying evidence hidden below the house, including severed hands and preserved eyeballs connected to the murders. Then Pierre notices something else. The avalanche grenade he saw earlier is missing. That can only mean one thing. Fanny has already gone to the mountains to trigger a massive avalanche. Pierre and Max immediately return to the police station and order an emergency evacuation of everyone at Gurnon University. While the police begin clearing the area, Pierre and Max head straight for the mountains themselves. After traveling up the mountain by gondola, they finally reach the summit by morning and come face to face with Fanny, who is preparing to carry out the attack. Pierre desperately tries to stop her and understand her motives, but before he can get through to her, another shocking figure suddenly appears. Judith is alive, and even more unbelievable, she and Fanny are identical twins. Years earlier, their mother Andre secretly faked Judith's death by cutting off one of her fingers and staging the accident scene before taking Judith away to hide her from Gurnon forever. Meanwhile, Fanny remained behind and became one of the university's so-called perfect creations. That is why she possesses incredible physical strength and was able to overpower Max earlier in the story. Judith's existence posed a massive threat to Gurnon. If the truth about her ever came out, the entire conspiracy would collapse. That is why people connected to the university kept hunting her down in silence. Both Judith and Fanny eventually learned the horrifying truth about Gurnon's experiments, the forced breeding programs, and the manipulation of children from the mountain villages. The murders were their revenge against everyone involved. Fanny also reveals why she never killed Pierre when she had the chance before. She intentionally left him alive because she wanted him to uncover the truth himself. That is also why she secretly helped throughout the investigation. Now the final confrontation begins. Judith is determined to trigger an avalanche large enough to bury Gurnon, completely, killing the professors and students inside and ending the experiments forever. Pierre and Max try to calm her down, but Judith refuses to listen. Unlike her sister, Fanny still hesitates and struggles with the idea of mass murder. The situation quickly spirals into chaos. A violent fight breaks out, shots are fired, and Judith is ultimately killed during the confrontation.
J'ai pas le choix.
Si, tu l'as.
But before anyone can react, the avalanche finally begins. A massive wall of snow crashes down the mountain and sweeps everything in its path. Sometime later, rescue teams and police finally manage to find Pierre, Max, and Fanny alive beneath the snow. And with that, the film comes to an end. So the moral of the story is, if your university starts a secret superhuman breeding program, maybe just stick to study groups and free Wi-Fi instead.